Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show from Sports Illustrated, the MMQB, and one of our favorites, joining us from the Metroplex, where the owners are meeting right now in the National Football League. How you doing, Albert?
I'm great. That's a really interesting conversation you guys are having on Deion. I'll say this, and I know money's coming into play and everything else, but I just think this is something I can add, and I think you'd probably echo this.
Sure.
The way, like when I was in NFL Network for 6 years, the way the young players in the league, like, revere Deion.
Gravitate. Yes.
I revere him. And it was, I would walk in with that mic flag, and they would say, "Could you say hello to Prime for me? Could you tell me? Could you make sure that he knows that I'm doing this because it's his net?" I mean, it was like, it's unlike any. I mean, and there are a lot of great players that were working there when we were there together, Rich, and it was just, it was unbelievable, like the gravitational pull that players had to Deion, and I think that's a huge part of what's playing out today, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's just, I mean, and I don't know what it is, because it's amazing, because these kids now are too young to have actually seen him play.
No doubt.
Right?
No question. Because he's speaking their language now, though, Albert. He talks their language now, and if you're telling a kid who wants to make it to the NFL, and that's the goal, and Deion knows that's the goal, right? And who would you, certainly if you're a defensive back, who would you want to be coached by more?
Right.
Than this guy. You know, the crazy thing about this is, Albert, and Brockman knows this as well, the most surprised I am that Deion is Coach of the Year isn't the fact that he's achieved it, okay, at all. The most surprised I am is because this is a guy who, when we first started working together in the early aughts, would watch a football game, and when somebody did something stupid, he would scream, "Cut him!" at the screen.
Cut him!
You know?
Like before he got back to the sideline.
He said if before he got back to the sideline, I would cut him.
Yeah.
Send him to the locker room.
You know, and that's a Coach of the Year now. You know, or you got to be patient. You gotta cajole. You gotta teach. That's the most amazing thing, you know, about it to me.
Yeah. It's crazy, and I look, like, there's, I mean, with some of these walls being broken down, there's no reason why he can't, build the right sort of coaching staff and create partnerships because of the platform that he has, and give kids opportunities that maybe they can't get anywhere else. You know what I mean? Like at Jackson State, it's unbelievable and good for him, because this is definitely outside the box thinking, and it's not being kind of a prisoner to what the norms of college football have been. And he found something clearly, because, that gravitational pull that we talked about the kids have to him personally is now, absolutely in play. And in the case of the number one player in the country going to, an FCS HBCU school.
Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter, the MMQB, right here on the Rich Eisen Show from Sports Illustrated. What's going on the conversation about this Saturday game between the Raiders and the COVID-19 ravaged Cleveland Browns organization?
Yeah, I mean, generally this December meeting, in Dallas, and it's here every year, is sort of an update on things, like where we're going with the Super Bowl. It's setting things up for the following year's off season, and obviously, like, the happenstance that we're here, and you have the outbreak with the Rams on Monday and Tuesday. Now the outbreak with the Browns. Washington's got a rising number of cases too. I think has brought this to the forefront, and it's what everybody's been talking about over the last 2 days here. What I can tell you, Rich, is that they're planning on going forward with the game on Saturday, and one of the issues that they're going to have now is that if they were to move it to, like, say, Sunday or Monday, that probably wouldn't do any good, because the overwhelming number of cases in the NFL this year, when guys test positive, they're having problems testing out. Like, if you'll notice, if you go through all these cases, almost every one of the player cases, the staff cases, these people have sat out for the full 10 days because they keep testing positive, so they have to go through the full 10 days. So, like, you make the argument with the Browns, if that's the case with these 15 guys and maybe the number rises over the next couple of days, like, what sense is it to move the game to Monday or Tuesday when you're still within that 10-day window? So I think that they're going to go forward with the game as best they can. And while that's going on here in Dallas, the officials from the league office basically informed, the owners and executives that they're discussing significant changes to the COVID-19 protocols with the union now. I think everybody's viewing this as an inflection point. And, I think the feeling here is that it's going to be difficult under the current circumstances to get from here to the middle of February and to Los Angeles for the Super Bowl under the current circumstances unaffected. So, my sense is we will see some alterations to the COVID-19 protocols coming.
Like what? I mean, because you could test positive well after you, through
Sure.
CDC rules and guidelines that everybody is, followed since the beginning of this pandemic. You could test positive long after you're no longer symptomatic
Right.
or considered to be contagious. That's why many people who travel abroad are stuck there when they test positive abroad, because they're not allowed to leave the country or come back in until they're test negative for many spots around the world. So that's in place for somebody who might be vaccinated and has a false positive. So you get 2 negatives and now you get to play. But if you are actually positive, it's impossible sometimes to test twice in a row, which is why if this is for real with Baker Mayfield, a real positive, he's out for Saturday. That's going to be Case Keenum's gig. So what changes are you referring to, do you think, with the policy here?
I think there are 3 things that we can look for. I'm not saying they're all going to happen, but they've all at least been discussed. The first one is the idea that they could cut down the waiting periods. That 10-day period, maybe they turn it to 5 days. Somehow altering that waiting period would be, I think, one piece of this that they will and have already broached with the union, and all this stuff obviously needs to be discussed with the union. The second thing is that they could go into enhanced protocols with all teams in the playoffs, which I think would require meeting virtually.
Right.
And this is something that they actually warned teams that this could happen, and maybe it happens before the playoffs, but going back to even vaccinated players wearing masks around facilities and all of that different stuff. So that's number 2. And number 3, and this to me is probably the most significant one if it were to happen, because it would be, I think, a departure from where pro sports have been over the last year and a half, is that they could incentivize players getting the booster shot by saying to them, if you get the booster shot, we will no longer test you regularly as long as you're asymptomatic. And that's the one to me, like that, like I said, like it'd be a pretty major step in a different direction than the one they've been going in, but I think maybe a step towards this sort of resignation that this isn't going away and that everybody has to learn to live with it. And at least for the people who have the booster shot and have taken the steps to protect themselves and others, like they shouldn't have to miss work if there's an asymptomatic, if they're asymptomatic. In other words, you're treating symptoms. You're not searching for the virus. And I know that sounds like a pivot for them, and it is. But that's the way a lot of workplaces in America are right now. Rich, like you look at like most workplaces, they're not testing people regularly. Got people get sick, then there's contact tracing and the rest of it. Schools work that way. They're not testing kids regularly. But when something comes up, they will test. And so that to me would be the most significant one, is if they decide to create that incentive for players to get booster shots. And of course, as I'm sure you guys read the other day, by December 27th, for staff to remain in Tier 1 and Tier 2, they're actually going to have to get booster shots. So that last part has to be negotiated with the union, but it could happen.
All right, Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. And there's another item that I think I'd like to bring to the attention of fans. It's been in the hopper, and I imagine it's getting voted on, or it's already been voted on, that teams can virtually meet with candidates for head coaching positions with 2 weeks left in the regular season. So normally a coach would be, allowed to finish out a campaign, and then that leads to, as referred to, the Black Monday, the day after the season, where so many coaches get fired. Is it possible that we might see some interim head coaches toot sweet because leagues aren't going to be holding virtual meetings that can get out and and a coach that's already been sitting there hears that there's an interview for a vacancy that hasn't occurred yet. Are we going to see some firings in the next couple of weeks, you think? Just right around Christmas?
I think it's definitely possible. I think December 27th would be the day. I think that's the Monday of Week 16. So, I think that's certainly possible where, if you're a team that's sitting there and you're saying we're going to fire him in 2 weeks, why don't we just get this process started? It could create a domino effect. And, I think that's something certainly to consider here where, let's just say for argument's sake, like the Raiders, they don't move on from Rich Bisaccia, but they maybe somehow make the announcement, all right, he's not going to be the head coach going forward. They start interviewing people. Does that motivate, say, Chicago or Minnesota or someone else to move on for their coach? Because they could be saying to themselves, well, this other team is going to have a 2-week head start on us, and they may have something like borderline wrapped up with a candidate that we may like by the time we get to the finish line of our season and we want to fire our coach. So I think it absolutely could become a competitive thing where one team that's planning on firing its coach decides to pull the trigger a couple weeks early so as not to fall behind somebody else who's already pulled that trigger. And it'll be interesting to see, the intention of it, of course, is to make the hiring process a little bit less rushed and, give more candidates a chance to interview, so teams are able to make more thorough decisions rather than it being pure speed dating. And I think that part of it's good, but, I absolutely think there's a possibility that this does lead to teams pulling the trigger a little earlier than they would have planned otherwise.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show, and you just gave me a list of places where coaches might be on the way out and franchises making a change. What's the situation with Jacksonville right now at this owners meeting that you can tell, Albert?
I still think it's TBD. I think Shad Khan's obviously been very, very patient with coaches over the years. Gus Bradley got 4 years. Doug Marrone got 4 years. And I think this has got to be something where Shad Khan takes the temperature of his building. And, I think you go one of two ways. And I don't know that there's any other way to go. You either move on from Urban Meyer after this year, or you decide that you're going to double down on him, and that's going to have to include changes on his staff and him bringing in guys that that he can work with. Because clearly, and Tom Pelissero did a great job, reporting that stuff out for you guys. I think it's pretty clear that building isn't walking in lockstep right now, or else these sorts of stories don't get out. And I've heard some of this stuff too. So you either have to move on from Urban and make that difficult decision and probably write some pretty big checks, or you have to double down on Urban and go and get guys that are, I guess, more in line with the way that he does things and give it another go in 2022. It's, like I said, I don't think any sort of final decision's been made on anything quite yet on it. But, those two, I mean, if you had asked Shad Khan 10, 11 months ago, what would your reaction be if these were your two options in December? He probably wouldn't be very happy about that.
No, of course not. Certainly with Trevor Lawrence, hanging in the balance and his career and one of the greatest prospects that college has sent to the next level, or the fact that Jacksonville had dropped, in their laps. They earned, obviously, with their play last year. But, you mentioned right there the way that Urban does things. That's doing a heavy lift right there, because that assumes that it still works in the professional ranks. Because, the stories that you hear about how he challenged his coaches and things like that is exactly the stuff that he would do at Ohio State.
Yep.
That's exactly the stuff that might be happening behind the scenes. And players, Buckeyes, would never dare go across the field and chit-chat with, Michigan or Penn Staters or Michigan Staters saying, you have no idea what's going on around here,
right,
like the Jaguars did with the Rams. That's the difference between college and professional ranks. So the question is what can he change his reaction to losing? Because the way that he reacted in the preseason and throughout this season, through the Tom Pelissero quotes, you can't do that in the NFL when you're going to lose sometimes more than, let's just say, once every 2 years like he used to in college, right? I mean, is that a fair question?
Quite honestly, it was the question, I think, coming into the year, was is the way he does things going to translate? And, how is he going to handle losing? I mean, he's already lost 2 more games in Jacksonville than he did in 7 years at Ohio State. And, we've all seen, and everybody's seen it, the way he reacts, the way he reacted to losses at Florida, the way he reacted to losses at Ohio State. I mean, this is a very serious question. Like, can you handle a league where, if you go 11-6, like, that's losing 6 times in a year, but that's a really good year. And if you're going to Jacksonville, that'd be a 10-win improvement. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's been management of failure. I think was always going to be a big question, and then I think like with this program, like kind of being able to cross over to the pros. This is such an interesting thing because I think like so much of, what he was able to do and the way he was able to get people to work at Ohio State was like, it was like testimony. It was truth over testimony. It was like, if you follow what I'm doing, we're going to win huge and everybody's going to get rich. Right. Like, so like, can he push people the same way when maybe it's taking a little longer to get those results in the pros? I mean, this as well as I do, Rich, it's a lot harder to push guys in the pros that way if you're not giving them immediate results because everybody's job is on the line every day of the week. And so that to me is going to be an interesting thing, to follow here over the next couple of weeks, presuming he survives the week. And like where that building is going forward, especially with I would say, like there should be urgency there to make sure that you've got your young quarterback in the right spot and with the right people. And, that leads to a bunch of big box questions that Shad Khan's got to answer.
What's the sense there? What are people saying? I mean, again, this is a scuttlebutt industry that we're in. What is it? Walking around that building right there, that hotel.
So like, here's what's interesting is I think Urban has determined. I apologize for the wind coming in here from Texas. I like the sense that I've got is that Urban feels like there are a number of weak links on his coaching staff, and he's responsible for that because he hired those guys.
Yeah, right.
And generally, what he would do in his previous stops, when that was there, is he'd get guys in a room and he'd basically say, "What have you done for me lately? What are you doing to make us better today?" And he'd challenge guys, and in a way, it was the guys who knew maybe they weren't doing enough would feel uncomfortable, and eventually they'd get weeded out. And I'm not saying it's the right way to do things, but it took like a certain type of coach to survive in that environment. And quite frankly, Rich, your coaches probably aren't talking to the media the same way they do in the NFL. You know what I mean? Like, so that's a piece of it too. And, again, like, it's just, you look at where they are, and like I've heard Urban has basically left the defensive staff alone. Like they don't have like there's not an issue there with him and the defensive coaches. They do their thing. He thinks they've done a good job. They're left alone. I think like the questions are right there with that offensive staff. And you even wonder, like you look at this, right? And so, does Darrell Bevel survive? Does Brian Schottenheimer survive? Do the position coaches survive? Especially when like his old offensive coordinator from Florida and Utah, Dan Mullen, is sitting out there maybe wanting to get in the NFL. So like I just like there's so much, like there's so many big decisions that need to be made here. And again, like hanging in the balance is a generational quarterback prospect. The best quarterback prospect is Andrew Luck, and a guy who has been held in that esteem, that Luck Elway Manning sort of category. Again, like it's just, I think the question if your shot is like, do you trust that Urban is going to get it right with our young quarterback, or do you say, I don't want to miss out on getting like a Josh McDaniels with Trevor Lawrence now? Again, I can't say enough. Like these are big box decisions for the owner of the Jaguars, and he's not used to having to make them this quickly because generally the issues in his organization, whether it was when Gus was the coach, when Doug was the coach, generally aren't this high profile and haven't been anywhere near this volatile.
Nor could he possibly lose a candidate to replace them during the season because you weren't allowed to talk to candidates during the season, and other teams might get a head start on those folks. I mean, so the clock's ticking literally right now, not a month from now. Wow.
And I believe they play Houston this week, right?
The Jacksonville Jaguars?
Right. Yeah, I think they do. Is it Houston? So what happens if you lose like in in a big way to Houston. You know,
Oh my!
It's
Like week one. Like week one.
I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have to I think they, beyond just winning, I think they have to show. If I'm Shad Khan, you're looking for real signs of life this week. That's what you want to see, an engaged team. You want to see a team that's going out there with something to prove. I mean, if they look if it sort of looks dead fish again like it did last week, I mean, I think that, obviously would bring in another set of questions.
Albert, thanks for the call. Get out of the wind. Go get some more information. Greatly appreciate it. We'll chat soon.
All right, thanks, Rich.
That's Albert Breer, at Albert Breer on Twitter. I follow him. You should as well. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.